Picture a Louisiana night in 1984, humid, heavy, hiding a secret no one saw coming. Gary Carrion, a burger kingpin with dreams as big as his smile, vanishes without a trace after a triumphant call to his brother Ted. What happened in those lost hours? A bloodstained Cadillac, a cryptic note, and a strip joint's neon glow hold the clues, but the truth is darker than anyone imagines. For 30 years, Ted hunts the shadows, chasing killers who slipped through justice's grasp. Want to know what he found? Stick around, this story's just beginning. The Louisiana sky hung low that fateful night in 1984, swollen with clouds that seemed to cradle a secret too heavy to release. Gary Carrion drove through the humid dark, his hands steady on the wheel of his champagne-colored Cadillac, a faint smile tugging at his lips. He was no kingpin of lore, no shadowed titan of crime, just a man who'd built a modest empire of burger joints alongside his younger brother, Ted. Sonic Brothers, they called it, a chain of fast food havens where the sizzle of patties on the grill was the soundtrack to their shared ambition. That night, Gary had crossed into Mississippi, securing a hefty funding deal to expand their dream, a milestone that felt like the first rung on a ladder to the stars. He dialed Ted from a crackling payphone, his voice brimming with triumph. "Ted, I'm heading your way. We need to talk and celebrate." Ted Carrion, leaner and quieter than his brother, waited in their Baton Rouge apartment, sprawled on a worn armchair, a half-empty beer sweating in his grip. Gary wasn't just an older sibling, he was a father figure, a rock, ever since their dad passed when Ted was still in diapers. They were more than brothers. They were confidants, partners, two halves of a whole forged in grease and grit. The dim glow of a single lamp cast jagged shadows across the room as Ted pictured Gary bursting through the door, all broad grins and big plans. But the hours ticked by, the beer grew warm, and Ted drifted into an uneasy sleep, oblivious to the void creeping closer. Morning broke with a cruel clarity. Sunlight stabbed through the blinds, rousing Ted from the couch. He blinked, groggy, then froze. Gary wasn't there. No clatter of keys, no cheerful holler, just silence, thick and raw. "He always shows," Ted muttered, his fingers tightening on the armrest. Gary was punctual, dependable, a husband, a father, a businessman who lived by the clock. For him to vanish without a word was unthinkable. A chill slithered up Ted's spine, a primal instinct whispering truths his mind refused to grasp. He grabbed his jacket, stepped into the humid dawn, and began a hunt that would consume 3 decades of his life, a relentless quest to find his brother, his hero, in a world that had swallowed him whole. Ted Carrion wasn't a detective. He was a burger flipper with calloused hands and a heart tethered to family, a man who'd never imagined himself stalking shadows. But when Gary disappeared, something snapped inside him, a switch flipped from brother to bloodhound. He tore through Baton Rouge with a fervor that bordered on madness, pounding on doors, peering into alleys, his voice hoarse from shouting Gary's name. "My brother Gary Carrion, tall, brown hair, bright eyes. Have you seen him?" He stormed into the clothing store where Gary had bought shirts, interrogating clerks who barely remembered the day before. He lingered beneath flickering streetlights, scanning the endless stream of headlights, willing Gary to emerge from the haze. Yet the city offered nothing, no trace, no echo. It was as if Gary had dissolved into the ether, a phantom erased from existence. One fragile thread dangled in the emptiness, a crumpled scrap of paper, unearthed by Larry Tucker, their lanky, sharp-eyed business partner, in the Baton Rouge apartment they shared for work. Scrawled across it in jagged ink was a single word: Erica. Larry shrugged as he handed it over. "Found it while cleaning. Tossed it out. Gary thanked me, said I'd saved him from trouble with his wife." Ted's brow furrowed. Gary, the devoted family man, cheating? The idea felt like a punch to the gut, but that scrap was a lifeline, a riddle begging to be solved. Larry's casual dismissal gnawed at Ted. There was something too neat about it, too convenient. Still, it was all he had. He pushed open the door to Hot Spot, a seedy strip joint where neon bled red across peeling walls, and the air reeked of cheap liquor and desperation. The crowd was a blur of glazed eyes and swaying bodies, girls twirling lazily on stage, men hunched over sticky tables. A dancer caught his gaze, her lips curling into a smirk. "Hey, Gary." Ted's heart lurched. "No, I'm Ted, Gary's brother." Has he been here? She tilted her head, sizing him up. Yeah, last night. Left with Erica. The name hit like a thunderclap. Erica the ghost on the paper. Ted's pulse raced, a storm brewing in his chest. Who was she? And why had Gary, the pillar of their family, stepped into this underworld? Erica wasn't Erica. She was Lila Muller, a name once synonymous with promise, now buried beneath layers of ruin. Back in Ohio, Lila had been a golden girl, a high school honor student whose violin sang with aching beauty, a track star whose strides cut through the wind. Born to wealth and privilege, she'd had the world at her feet until it slipped away. Drugs sank their claws into her, dragging her from clandestine parties to the sterile walls of rehab. She broke free, not to reclaim her life, but to flee it, washing up in Louisiana like driftwood on a murky shore. There, she shed Lila for Erica, a stripper, a sex worker, a fallen angel trading her body for survival under the dim lights of Hot Spot. Then came Ronald Dunnigan, a figure as grotesque as he was magnetic. Twice her age, he roamed the streets as a clown, grease paint smeared across a weathered face, balloons bobbing in his wake. A drifter with no roots, he lived on the fringes, yet wielded an inexplicable hold over Lila. She danced and sold herself to keep them afloat, her earnings fueling his aimless existence. Into this twisted orbit stepped Gary Carrion, a regular who paid her generously, his kindness a stark contrast to the grime around them. A strange bond formed, not love, but something murkier, a fascination between the burger baron and the broken beauty. Gary's visits grew frequent, his wallet open, his demeanor soft. To Lila, he was an escape. To him, she was a secret he couldn't shake. Ted pieced this together with a growing dread, each revelation slicing deeper. Gary wasn't just passing through Hot Spot, he belonged there, a shadow self Ted had never glimpsed. The night he vanished, he'd left with Lila, stepping into her world. Ted's hands trembled as he clutched the bar counter, the neon glow painting his face in crimson. What had happened in those final hours? The answer loomed like a specter, dark and inevitable, pulling him toward a truth he feared to face. The police finally stirred when Ted's relentless prodding left them no choice. Days after Gary's disappearance, they found his Cadillac, its once pristine champagne finish now marred with streaks of dried blood, stark against the metal. Someone died in that trunk, the crime scene investigator said, his voice flat, cutting through the humid air. Ted stood frozen, staring at the car that had once gleamed with his brother's pride, now a rolling tomb defiled by violence. His knees buckled, but he held himself upright, fists clenched until his nails drew blood. This wasn't a disappearance anymore, it was a murder, and the proof was splattered across the wreckage. They turned to Lila and Ronald's apartment next, a cramped den on the edge of Baton Rouge. The door creaked open to a nightmare. Blood sprayed across the walls in chaotic arcs, pools of it congealing on the floor, chunks of plaster gouged out as if struck by a hammer or a skull. Ted's breath caught, his stomach churning. The room screamed of a struggle, a slaughter, a final stand Gary hadn't won. He's not coming back, Ted whispered, the words tasting of ash. Every splatter was a dagger, every dent a testament to his brother's end. He stumbled outside, gulping air, the weight of certainty crushing him. Gary was gone, ripped away in a frenzy of violence, and the culprits had fled. Lila and Ronald were ghosts by then, vanished into the night. Word came later. They'd surfaced in Las Vegas, chasing the glitter of Sin City. Lila applied for an escort license, unwittingly tripping over a warrant from Baton Rouge, where she was wanted as a material witness. Ted didn't hesitate, he chartered a Learjet, riding alongside detectives, his heart a drumbeat of fury and hope. In Vegas, they hauled the pair into an interrogation room. Lila's eyes darted, her voice trembling. Dunnigan killed him, it was an accident. Ted's blood ran cold. Accident? The blood, the walls, the car, it was no accident. He demanded more, and fate delivered. Lila's diary, a handwritten confession scrawled in ink. Hit Gary. Next time Ron will hide in the closet. Good man. The words seared Ted's vision. This was no spontaneous act, it was a plan, cold and calculated. The trail of blood had led him here, but the fight was far from over. The Las Vegas interrogation room was a cage of flickering fluorescent light, its walls stained with the ghosts of 1,000 confessions. Ted Carrion sat behind the one-way glass, his breath fogging the pain, his eyes locked on Lila Muller. She perched on the edge of a metal chair, her once radiant beauty dulled by years of vice, her fingers twisting a strand of brittle hair. Ronald Dunnigan slouched beside her, his clownish grin replaced by a sneer that carved lines into his weathered face. Ted's hands clenched into fists, nails biting into his palms. He'd flown across states on a chartered Learjet, chasing the blood trail of his brother Gary, only to find himself here on the brink of answers, teetering on the edge of despair. The Baton Rouge detectives leaned in, their voices sharp as scalpels. "Tell us what happened, Lila," one demanded, slamming the diary onto the table. Her own words stared back at her. "Hit Gary. Next time Ron will hide in the closet." "Good man." Ted's stomach churned as he watched her flinch, her eyes darting to Ronald. "It was him," she whispered, her voice a fragile thread. "Dunnigan killed Gary. An accident." The detective snorted. "Accident? With blood sprayed across your apartment? A plan in your own handwriting." Ted's pulse thundered. He wanted to lunge through the glass, shake her until the truth spilled out. But Lila's gaze flickered, then hardened. "I didn't mean it," she said. "He made me." Ronald said nothing, his silence a wall of defiance. The detectives pressed harder, offering Lila a deal, immunity if she'd testify against him. Ted held his breath, hope flickering like a dying ember. This was at the moment justice could claw its way free. But then Lila's lips tightened, and she shook her head. "No," she said, her voice barely audible. "I won't." Ted's world tilted. The detectives exchanged glances, frustration etching their faces. Without her testimony, the diary, damning as it was, wasn't enough. Premeditation needed a voice, and Lila had locked hers away. Ronald smirked, a predator scenting freedom. Hours later, Ted stood outside the Vegas sheriff's office, the desert wind whipping sand against his legs. The couple walked free, Lila's heels clicking on the pavement, Ronald's shadow stretching long and grotesque. Ted's chest burned, a scream trapped in his throat. "They murdered my brother," he growled to the lead detective, a grizzled man named Bonner. "And you're letting them go?" Bonner sighed, rubbing his temples. "No witness, no body, no case. We had them, Ted, then we didn't." The diary, the blood, the car, it had all crumbled to dust in an instant. Ted watched Lila and Ronald vanish into the neon haze, their silhouettes swallowed by the city's glittering maw. He'd been so close, only to see justice slip through his fingers like smoke. That night, in a cheap motel room, Ted sat on the edge of a sagging bed, staring at his hands. They trembled not with fear, but with a rage so pure it felt holy. 30 years stretched before him, an endless road paved with this moment's failure. Gary's laugh echoed in his mind, a memory of burger grease and late-night dreams, now tainted by blood. "I'll find you," Ted vowed, his voice a low growl in the dark. "No matter how long it takes." He didn't sleep. He planned. Lila and Ronald thought they'd won, but Ted Carrion wasn't done, not by a long shot. The years bled into one another, a relentless march through shadows. Ted Carrion became a hunter, his life a map of Lila Muller and Ronald Dunnigan's movements, each pin a stab at reclaiming Gary. He didn't let go, not when the police shelved the case, not when friends urged him to move on, not when his own body begged for rest. Sonic Brothers faded, the burger joints sold off or shuttered, but Ted's fire burned hotter with every passing day. He tracked them with a precision that bordered on obsession, a man possessed by a vow carved into his soul. Lila had fled Vegas, shedding Erica like a snake sloughs its skin. Ted found her in New York, a nurse now, her hands scrubbed clean of glitter and sin. She'd earned a degree, married, born 2 children, twins with her sharp cheekbones and haunted eyes, before divorcing and settling into a quiet life in Queens. Ted watched her from afar, a shadow across the street, noting her routines, the school drop-offs, the late shifts at the hospital. She'd built a facade of normalcy, but Ted saw the cracks, the way her gaze darted at sudden noises, the tremor in her fingers when she lit a cigarette. She knew someone was out there, waiting. Ronald drifted back to Louisiana, a ghost in grease paint haunting the bayous. He lived on a disability check faked, Ted learned from a loose-lipped contact eking out days in a ramshackle trailer near Baton Rouge. Ted hired private eyes, bribed locals, pieced together his life. A loner, a drunk, a man whose clownish past had curdled into something sinister. They never crossed paths again, Lila and Ronald, their bond severed by the weight of what they'd done, or so Ted believed. He shadowed them both, a phantom weaving through their lives, his presence a whisper they couldn't shake. He tried everything. Letters to prosecutors, pleas to reopen the case, late-night stakeouts with a camera trembling in his hands. He once stood outside Ronald's trailer, rain sluicing down his face, staring at the flickering TV light through a cracked window, imagining Gary's last moments. Another time, he lingered near Lila's hospital, watching her scrub out after a shift, wondering if the blood she washed away ever reminded her of his brother. 30 years of this, 30 years of maps, notes, sleepless nights until his hair grayed and his hands shook, but his resolve never wavered. The break came when Ted least expected it, a flicker of light after decades of dark. Larry Tucker, Gary's old business partner, had a daughter, Janice, who'd risen to become a district attorney investigator in Baton Rouge. Ted hadn't seen Larry in years, their bond frayed by time and loss, but Janice remembered the Sonic Brothers days, the uncle figure Gary had been. She called Ted one humid afternoon in 2014, her voice crisp over the line. "We can reopen it. We need DNA." Ted's heart stuttered. The blood in Gary's Cadillac still preserved in evidence could tie the case together, but it needed a match. He tracked down Wade, Gary's son, now a man in his 30s with his father's bright eyes and a quiet life far from Louisiana's ghosts. Ted met him at a diner, the air thick with coffee and tension. "I need your help," Ted said, sliding a photo of Gary across the table, smiling, alive, a relic of better days. Wade nodded, his jaw tight. A cheek swab later, the lab confirmed it. The blood in the trunk was Gary's. Ted felt a jolt, proof, at last, that his brother had died in that car, a truth he'd known but never held. The case had legs again, but Ted wanted more than probability. He wanted certainty. He recruited Anne, a friend with a knack for charm, to infiltrate Ronald's world. Ted funded her rent, drinks, whatever it took to cozy up to the lonely drifter. Ronald, weathered and wary, took the bait, spilling fragments of his life over cheap whiskey. Ted went further, donning a chauffeur's cap to drive them around, his eyes on Ronald in the rearview mirror, searching for a crack. It paid off, and coaxed out a boast. "I've done things no one will ever pin on me." Not a confession, but a spark. Ted handed it to Janice, who paired it with the DNA. The net was tightening. Ted stood outside Lila's Queens apartment in 2014, disguised as a homeless man, tattered coat, unshaven jaw, a cardboard sign masking his intent. He'd tracked her here after the DNA hit, the case roaring back to life. When Baton Rouge police swooped in, cuffs gleaming, Ted watched her stumble out, her face a mask of shock. "I knew you'd come back," she muttered, her voice a ghost of Erica's bravado. He said nothing, his eyes burning through her as she was led away. The interrogation room awaited, and this time, Ted knew she'd break. Inside, Lila faced a barrage. Detectives hammered her with the diary, the DNA, Anne's recordings. She tried her old game, wide eyes, trembling lips. "He threatened me, my family. I was young, under his spell." But the lead interrogator, a bulldog named Reese, cut through it. "Enough lies, Lila. You've stalled for 30 years. Talk." She crumpled, her defiance folding like wet paper. "It was his plan," she said, pointing at Ronald's shadow in her mind. "He got poison powder, I think. Tested it on mice first." Ted, watching via live feed, felt bile rise. Poison? She painted the scene, luring Gary with tainted wine, Ronald hiding in the closet. Gary started choking, Dunnigan dragged him out, smothered him with a pillow. Then the horror. In the bathroom, Ronald sawed Gary in half, a little saw. She sobbed, stuffing him into trash bags, dumping them in highway bins. Ted's vision blurred, rage and nausea warring within him. Reese pressed, "You expect us to buy this?" Lila shrugged, broken. "It's the truth." Prosecutors doubted the details, no body, no saw, but offered her a plea. Testify, get 30 years. This time she took it. Ronald Dunnigan faced the courtroom in Baton Rouge, his clownish mask long gone, replaced by a gaunt, defiant shell. Lila's testimony, 30 years for her, life for him, sealed his fate. She laid bare the motive, a thrill kill. He wanted to know what it felt like, she said, her voice hollow. To take a life. Ted sat in the gallery, his hands steady now, watching the gavel fall. Life without parole. Justice, after 3 decades, tasted bittersweet with victory, sour with loss. The sickest twist wasn't the act, but the why. Gary Kind. Driven, Gary died for a psychopath's curiosity. Ted left the courthouse, the Louisiana sun searing his skin, and whispered, "I got you, you son of a bitch." He'd kept the case alive, a brother's vow unbroken. Sonic Brothers was dust, but Gary's memory wasn't. Ted drove past their old flagship spot, now a vacant lot, and let the tears come not for defeat, but for the fight won. And there you have it, 30 years of grit, grief, and unrelenting resolve. Ted Carrion turned a brother's loss into a fight for justice, proving some bonds can't be broken, even by blood and betrayal. Gary's killers faced their reckoning, but the scars remain. What drives someone to chase truth that long? Could you do the same? This is just one tale from the shadows. There's more to uncover. Hit like if Ted's journey moved you. Share it with a friend who loves a mystery. And subscribe to Truth in the Dark for more stories that grip and haunt. Until next time, stay curious.